So we're so thrilled to have you all with us today for this important discussion and event about holding polluters accountable. As we all know here, we're in the midst of a global climate crisis that demands rapid and strong action. Additionally, we're in the face of a global pandemic. And these two things are deeply interconnected and demand our attention. According to the world's leading scientists, we're going to need to take dramatic action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions dramatically by 2030 if we're going to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. But unfortunately, we're already starting to witness the horrifying impacts of the climate crisis here in New York, across the country, and across the world. This past summer, we have seen a large number of hurricanes. Scientists are running out of names for all of the hurricanes we've seen. New York State suffered from hurricanes Irene and Sandy. Those communities are reeling from impacts of those superstorms to this day. We have a number of communities here in New York and across the US that suffer from poor air quality and very high asthma rates. And of course, we have wildfires that are raging out west that were so severe that even here in New York, we witnessed the smoggy skies. So sadly, this is only a taste of what can come if we don't take action. Thankfully, New York State has adopted some very bold climate policies, but in order to meet these goals, we have to make sure that polluters are held accountable, especially as our federal government continues to roll back crucial environmental protections and regulations and gives handouts to corporate polluters. So during the course of this event, we're going to be discussing the various avenues New York State has to hold polluters accountable through the legal system, through policy initiatives, and of course, through organizing. With that, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for our event this evening, New York State Attorney General Letitia James. To give you some background about the fantastic work that the Attorney General has done in her career, she's the 67th Attorney General for New York State. In 2013, she was elected the public advocate for the city of New York and became the first woman of color to hold citywide office. As public advocate, Mrs. James served as a watchdog over New York City government agencies and as an advocate for the city's most vulnerable communities. Prior to her role as public advocate, Tish James represented the 35th Council District in Brooklyn in New York City for 10 years. There, she demonstrated her strong environmental credentials and pushed through a revolutionary recycling package that included expanding plastic recycling, a new clothing and textile recycling program, and increased access to recycling in public spaces. New York State has proven itself to be a powerhouse in going after the federal government's environmental rollbacks and much more. So with all of that, I will now be unmuting the Attorney General. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please take it over.
Thank you, Liz, for that warm and welcome and that great introduction. And hello, everybody. Hello. Thank all of you who have joined virtually for this conversation. I'd also like to take a moment and thank the organizations responsible for bringing us together to help this, to discuss this all too important topic: NYPIRG, New York Youth Climate Leadership, and New York Renews. The battle against climate change is perhaps the greatest and most pressing battle that the world is facing. And this is not just an American issue. It impacts families, children, and wildlife in the furthest reaches of the world. I got involved in the environmental space as a city council member, as was mentioned, representing Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Prospect Heights, Crown Heights, and Bedford-Stuyvesant, because I represented residents of public housing, and the air quality in downtown Brooklyn was terrible because we were sandwiched between the BQE and a number of bridges, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge. And the public housing had a significant number of children with asthma. And 3 children, 3 little girls, died from asthma. And their pictures are on my desk. And they remind me each and every day of the challenges that we face. And they remind me that I have a responsibility and a duty to be part of that change and to focus on climate change. And right now we are in the midst of a global pandemic. We are witnessing firsthand and in real time how our individual actions profoundly impact on the lives of others. And this holds true, this especially holds true for our planet. Our climate is in crisis. We are seeing it each and every day. We are seeing it in those fires in California, wildfires in California and in Oregon and in California. And as I talk to my counterparts, my colleagues in those three states, they tell me about the quality of the air in those three respective states. And if we don't do everything in our power to stem rising sea levels, as we are seeing here in New York State, or protect and promote clean air and water, it will be to the detriment of people's health and livelihoods, not only in New York, not only in the United States, but all around the world. And towards that end, we must hold polluters accountable, and we must help them understand that we need business, and that we are prepared to use everything at our disposal, every tool at our disposal to hold them accountable, and that no one is above the law. I don't care how powerful that corporation is or how powerful that individual is. No one is above the law. When I served as the New York City's public advocate, I successfully led the fight to divest New York City's $220 billion pension fund from fossil fuel companies. We also went after the gun industry as well, but that's another topic. We sent a loud and clear message to the fossil fuel industry. It no longer pays to pollute. And now, as the Attorney General of the great state of New York, it's my job to fight back on behalf of all New Yorkers, even if that means taking the fight to Washington, D.C., and taking on the most powerful person in the country. And since 2017, no other state attorney general's office has taken more legal action against federal agencies on issues related to the environment than the New York State Office of the Attorney General. Now, let me pause and say that my colleague in California, Attorney General Becerra, he argues with me all the time. He thinks that he's filed more, and I always tell him, no, New York leads. Now that I am the Attorney General of the state of New York, California you have to take a second seat. So we are the first. So from public land and wildlife to safety and toxins to clean energy, energy efficiency to clean air to clean water, climate change, New York has been busy holding power to account. In fact, I wake up every day with this fire in my belly, knowing that I've got to hold polluters accountable, and knowing that as the Attorney General of the state of New York, I've got this responsibility to represent the great state of New York. I wake up every day with this fire in my belly. I march into my office. Well, these days it's my kitchen. I file a lawsuit, and then I go back upstairs. That's usually my day. And just last week, my office was in court arguing against the Trump administration's new dirty power rule, their replacement for the Clean Power Plan rule. And we are leading the opposition because the dirty power rule, unlike the rule it is replacing, will have virtually no impact on greenhouse gases, will have no impact, and it will basically, in fact, this rule will only serve to prolong the nation's reliance on polluting, expensive coal power plants and obstruct progress of states towards clean, renewable, and affordable electricity. You see, when you put in charge of the EPA a former lobbyist and former individuals who basically their interest is to those organizations and to those corporations, and when they put money over power over people, then you have an EPA which unfortunately is failing to honor its mission. The EPA's failure to regulate existing oil and gas sources allows the emission of millions of metric tons of methane that could be avoided each year, up to 3.7 million metric tons in 2021 alone. And that's why this office, we've filed a lawsuit seeking to compel the EPA to limit methane emissions from existing sources in the oil and gas industry. We were also fighting to stop the administration's stripping of vital clean water protection away in their new dirty water rule. Their illegal and harmful regulation puts our communities and our wildlife at risk, and we will not allow the EPA to permit water pollution to flow into our state without putting up a vigorous fight. Countless number of communities rely upon clean water, particularly in upstate New York and on Long Island. And we've got a responsibility and a duty to ensure that our water is clean. I'm proud to say that we are fighting back wherever we can, and we are delivering some key victories. When the Trump administration tried to delay an increase in penalties for car manufacturers who failed to meet fuel economy standards, we sued to stop them. We won that challenge, and now auto manufacturers must pay a steeper penalty for not meeting their goals. But our sights aren't only set on the federal government's actions or inactions. We are busy holding polluters to account here at home in New York State. We are challenging, obviously, the EPA's decision to give General Electric a passing grade on its cleanup of all of the PCB contaminations it caused in the Hudson River. Evidence shows that concentrations remain dangerously high in parts of the river, and we will not cease from demanding that the EPA does its job to hold GE accountable, to make the polluters make it right, and to clean up their mess. Over the summer, we filed a lawsuit for persistent and flagrant violations of New York solid waste and water pollution laws at 3 separate dump sites in a town in the Catskills. And the lawsuit seeks the removal of all of the waste from the sites and urges that and demands that they lawfully dispose of that waste, as well as the imposition of monetary penalties. We did the same on Long Island, where they were basically dumping waste into public lands in communities that were predominantly Latino. And we went after the polluter as well. The list goes on and on about all of the work that we've engaged in to fight for a healthy and a clean environment. And I look forward to discussing some of those in greater detail in the conversations ahead. But I want to take a moment to underscore that my office can't do it alone. No one person, no one organization, or one country can do it alone. We've got to do it in solidarity with one another and in action with you in this battle for environmental justice. It's no accident that young people are leading the way with this movement. And I love to be around young people. Young activists inspire me. And they've always been, as you know, in the forefront of change all throughout the history of this country and around the world. I think about the young women at the dawn of the 20th century who joined forces to fight for the right to vote, which is right now under challenge in this country. Those women who wanted to be treated as equal citizens. I remember in the 1960s, the groups of young people, both Black and white, who fought to desegregate America and dismantle state-sanctioned discrimination, which is again coming under attack right now. And remember the young people of 2008, some of whom may be your big brothers and sisters, who said, yes, we can, and we can change America. And they elected its first Black president. I couldn't see it then, but they were all in my neighborhood chanting, yes, we can, and convincing me that we can change the world. And then 2.5 years ago, in the wake of the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, students in Parkland, Florida, they organized a March for Our Lives movement that has engaged millions of Americans in the fight to end gun violence. And last year, students around the world, they organized and they led climate strikes demanding that people in power do the hard things necessary to save our planet. With 800 strikes planned in the United States alone, young people demanded to be heard. Young people lifted their voices to save our planet and save the future. And I'm so proud of the young activists who are part of this organization, organizations like NYPIRG and New York Youth Climate Leaders, and those who volunteer in my office. Without a doubt, young people are on the move, and you're making a big difference, particularly when we need it the most. And we need you, and we need you now. I would argue now more than ever. So young people and old people and poor people and rich people, white people, Black people, Latino people, gay people, straight people, all people in this together. And we must band together like never before, because the moment to act, my friends, is before us now. Because there are forces that represent an existential threat to all that we believe in, all that we stand in, and all of those who don't care about those 3 little girls who died from an asthma attack. And so the moment to strategize and organize is now, to put all of our differences aside. And the time, my friends, to mobilize to vote is also now. 19 days, but who's counting? All people concerned about clean energy, clean water, clean air must not sit idly by on the sidelines. Not now, not ever. There's no excuse. And no matter what they throw at us to suppress our basic right to vote, we've got to vote anyway. We need your activism. I need your passion. I need your voice. I need your steely resolve. I need your vote in each and every election, from the bottom of the ballot to the top of the ballot. That is your voice to tell those in power what matters most. This is your planet, your world that you'll inherit, and your mission, and your moment. And I will stand idly by and support you, and support your right to raise your voice, and support your right to protest. I thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Attorney General. That was fantastic. You are so right. We cannot do this as one person. It requires a collective, and history has demonstrated that. And NYPIRG is so proud to be a student-led organization, and we are proud to have, as a co-sponsor of this event, another youth-led organization. So with that, we're going to turn this over now. We have a fantastic youth panel to ask you a few questions. So I'm just going to quickly go through our participants lists and find our students and unmute them so they can get geared up to ask you questions.
Sure.
So that is the unmute button there. Hopefully that works. Okay. One student. I believe at this point, I have now unmuted all of our student speakers. So guys, make sure to introduce yourselves before you ask your questions. And please go forth. I believe our first questioner is Bria.
Hey, Bria.
Hi, Attorney General James. How you doing today?
I'm good. Just call me Tish.
Okay. So my name is Bria Hill. I attend SUNY New Paltz, and I'm from Harlem, New York.
Yay.
So the first question I have for you today is a question that we all should have, is how can we as students or grassroots advocacy help the Attorney General's work?
So obviously, as I stated in my comments, I can't do this alone.
Mm-hmm.
I need all of your activism. I need all of you to volunteer. I need all of you to form organizations and alliances. And I need some of you to volunteer for these wonderful organizations or accept internships in my office. We have a number of internships in my office. As most of you know, we filed a lawsuit against Exxon. We filed a lawsuit against Exxon, basically alleging that they violated the rights of their shareholders when they did not, their investors, when they did not tell them about the impact of global warming. We were not successful. We lost that case. But what it fueled was other attorney generals across this nation. It was a novel, novel litigation, and we wanted to press the envelope. And other attorney generals across this nation decided to pick up the mantelpiece and run with additional litigation with different angles and different causes of action. And so my point is, I need all of you to think outside the box. That was a case that was filed where we were thinking outside of the box. We need more novel and new approaches to the law to hold polluters accountable. And even if you lose, it's okay. Because basically what you do is you stand up for your principles, and you basically send a message to others that they too should consider novel approaches to holding polluters accountable. And so I just say, call our office, become an intern. We have paid positions. And I urge all of you, obviously, to get involved in this fight to save our planet. And I thank you for that question.
Thank you for the answer.
Thanks. After that, I think we have Brooklyn.
Hello, my name is Brooklyn Darling.
I love your name.
Thank you. I also attend SUNY New Paltz. I'm a sophomore there, and I am originally from Wyanskill, which is just east of Albany, New York. And my question for you today is, where do you see the Attorney General's role fitting in with the larger movement to fight climate change?
So, usually it's up to the federal government to enforce environmental laws. And they've historically played a key role. However, since taking office, and I've been in office now, 18 months now, 18, 20 months, this administration has engaged in a reckless slash and burn campaign. And basically a retrenchment from all federal protections protecting our environment. And they have basically defunded, diluted, diminished, destroyed, and hollowed out the EPA. And it's obviously a threat to our public health. And it's a particular threat to low income communities and people of color. And so we fought back. And like I said, I've joined with other attorney generals. Primarily, I'll be honest, I know we can't be political, but most of them have been Democratic attorney generals. New York and California, we've led the way. Massachusetts, Maura Healey, Attorney General Javier Becerra, Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, we've led the way. And so I can't believe it. I, a Black woman, am defending states' rights. And if you know anything about states' rights, you know at a time when, it wasn't cool to represent states' rights, particularly during the civil rights struggle, but that's what we are doing. But change is coming. How many more days? Say it loud. 19. 19 more days. And we're going to continue to take legal actions. And we're going to continue to stem the harm and hopefully reverse all of the harm that has been done. Thank you, Brooklyn.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great response.
Love that name.
So I realized one of our students, I am not seeing her name. She might not have her last name.
Is she on the phone?
It's possible. So Ellie.
She says she's here.
You're here under Elizabeth. Great. Let me get you. Okay. I think I've got the right
Yes, you did.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you, Ellie.
Hi, I'm sorry about that. My name is Elizabeth Lopez, also Ellie, and
Hi,
I go to
Ellie.
Queens College. I'm from Queens as well. And my question is, what happens to the funds collected from the polluters?
So, in all of our lawsuits, what we try to do, and what I'm trying to do more and more of, is take settlement funds and invest them and use them for a particular purpose for which it was intended. So, monies from a multi-million-dollar Clean Air Act settlement from the American Electric Power Company, we use to invest in an electric truck demonstration project. We did it in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, the New York Botanical Garden, and several other not-for-profits in the city of New York. We basically wanted to show that electric trucks obviously are the wave of the future, and we wanted to take some of that settlement money and use for that purpose. These trucks are 100% electric, use 100% electric power. And so it's really critically important that we demonstrate to the real world the cost effectiveness of these electric trucks. Another lawsuit payment from a consent judgment with a major chemical company over hazardous waste violations. We've partnered with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper and the National Wildlife Foundation in a program of environmental education and leadership development for students attending Niagara schools in environmental justice areas of the county. That's what we do. We basically try to use funds from environmental settlement to be used for environmental purposes and further of our cause, to promote, again, clean air, clean water, clean energy. And that's what we do with our settlements. And hopefully some of you guys can join our office and join in some of our litigation and identify not-for-profits and organizations and educational tools that we can invest in towards that purpose.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tristan.
Okay, and our next student panelist is Radesh. Do I have you unmuted, Radesh?
Yes, you do.
There we go.
Hello, Attorney General. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello,
my
Radesh.
name
How are
is.
you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. My name is Radesh Singh. I was born and bred in Rochester, New York, but I'm currently in Western Massachusetts attending Williams College as a first year. And I had a question. How do you view the Attorney General's role in shaping national and state environmental policies?
So, we have a organization, there's two organizations in the Attorney General space. We've got the National Association of Attorney Generals, which is bipartisan. And then we have the Democratic Attorney Generals Association. There's also the Republican Attorney Generals Association, but I'm a Democrat, and so they leave me out of those discussions. And so what we do is, in the Democratic Attorney General space, what we try to do is focus in areas where the Republican government has turned its back. And so we join with other attorney generals in filing amici briefs in support of their litigation. If there's programs that are no longer funded or have been diluted by the federal government, we try to mimic them in respective states, and mostly Democratic states. There are more Democratic attorney generals right now in this nation than Republican attorney generals. And what we try to do is work together collaboratively, again, on addressing all of those programs and in litigation and in supporting litigation of one another. That's what we try to do. And we, again, not only use litigation, but we also use advocacy. And we also work very, very closely with organizations such as NYPIRG and others in the state of New York and all across this nation in regards to environmental justice issues. It's really critically important. Again, it's important that we combat climate change and that we amplify the message that we are committed to climate change despite the leadership of this nation.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. So that was our student panel. Thank you guys so much for your questions. Attorney General, thank you so much for attending our event this evening and answering questions from our students. So at this point, we will be transitioning over to our expert panel to discuss further some of the points that the Attorney General raised today, along with the various policies that New York State could explore to hold polluters accountable. So with that, on the technical side of things, I am going to be unmuting our expert panel and introducing them. But I'd like to once again thank our student panelists and thank the Attorney General for her time today. If we can all give like a virtual round of applause, that would be so great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a
Make
good
sure you vote.
Yes, everyone
Thank
register
you.
to vote. The Attorney General's office and NYPIRG is going to have a hotline available if anyone has questions about voting. Okay, so let's get our panel going here. Okay. Excellent. All right, I've got all the appropriate people unmuted. Thank you guys so much. So I am thrilled to introduce my co-panelists on our expert panel to discuss climate policy and holding polluters accountable in New York State. Gabriel Silva. He is with Citizen Action of New York and also representing NY Renews today. And I'm also thrilled to introduce Liam Smith, who is one of the student leaders with the New York Youth Climate Leaders. So I'm gonna kick this over first to Gabriel, if you would like to talk about the CLCPA and CCIA and introduce yourself further, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, everybody. And I want to thank the Attorney General for your extremely inspiring words and for taking the time to be with us and for being such a bold, strong leader on our side fighting for climate change. So thank you. And I want to thank everybody for showing up to this, because at the end of the day, it is only with a community of people such as yourselves that we can make any progress on this issue. So to begin with, I just want to quickly introduce the organizations that I'm with. Citizen Action of New York is a statewide grassroots progressive organization that has been around since the 1970s. And we are a close affiliate of the Working Families Party. We work on a number of issues from climate change to housing to criminal justice, education, etc. And we work closely with coalitions such as the incredible New York Renews, which has been the leader in the CLCPA fight and the CCIA fight. New York Renews is a coalition of over 200 organizations that began after a massive march in 2014, the People's Climate March, which brought over 400,000 people to New York City to fight for climate, jobs, and justice. This coalition agrees on several points of unity, including to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and pollution, protect communities on the front lines, particularly communities of color and other underrepresented communities, and to hold corporate polluters accountable. And the way we're going to do that is through our two landmark pieces of legislation. The first one, the CLCPA, which is the Community Leadership, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, was passed recently after 4 years of fighting for it. This bill will get us to 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and being 100% carbon neutral by 2050. And it does this through by investing in marginalized communities so that 40% of the benefits of this clean energy and energy efficiency goes to those disadvantaged communities. I was in Houston when Hurricane Harvey hit, which was my first climate-induced hurricane. And at the George R. Brown Convention Center, Yeah, absolutely. The sign, I do like to say that that is no oil oligarchy, but they both work. So a key part of our bill is that the 40% of the benefits of the CLCPA must go to disadvantaged communities. And because, like I was saying, at the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston, it was clear to me that of the 17,000 people who had lost their homes and were sleeping in cots less than 2 feet away from each other in the same building that they were having to house all of their pets, there were mostly people of color and poor people, because they are the ones that are always at the front line of every disaster, not just climate change, but especially climate change. And so we need to put those communities at the forefront of our efforts. That is the justice part of our climate justice program. And this bill will also set renewable energy targets for New York State. And it will accomplish all this by establishing different working groups, such as the Just Transition Working Groups, to make sure that green jobs are good jobs. They meet particular labor standards. That the Climate Justice Working Group, which will make sure that funding opportunity goes to the disadvantaged communities, and other advisory groups, such as experts, groups involved in transportation, local government, etc. Now, this bill is considered the standard for climate legislation in the country. California often takes a lot of the reputation for being the leader in climate change, but we're the ones who got that bill passed. And the way we did that, which is very important, is through grassroots tactics involving people such as yourselves. So like I mentioned, we started off with a massive march in New York City, but then what we did specifically once we got New York News formed was we had demonstrations, rallies, we had opinion eds in the journals, the press, we had lobby visits, we even had civil disobedience. In fact, it was only after we had a lot of people do civil disobedience at Cuomo's office that he finally started serious negotiations over the climate leaders, the CLCPA. So it absolutely is effective to do grassroots actions to try to push these things forward. That is why we need a community of people such as yourselves to get involved. And we're going to use a lot of these same tactics to get the CCIA passed. Now, what is the CCIA? That is our polluter tax. So the CLCPA requires us to meet particular emission standards. The CCIA will give us the revenue to implement a lot of the CLCPA, along with other aspects of the CCIA. So the CCIA will impose $35 fine for every ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent. So for example, methane is 30 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So that would be priced much higher than carbon dioxide, for example. Now this fine will raise over $7 billion per year for 4 particular programs. One is green jobs and infrastructure, so that we can build utility scale renewable energy infrastructure, such as wind turbines, solar panels, and thermal heat pumps. And we will also make our electric grid much more efficient and expand public transit, especially by having electric transportation, so electric buses, things like that. The second program will be the Community Just Transition Fund, which will direct grants to community organizations for energy planning, to reduce local emissions, and to increase resiliency. And 75% of these funds have to go to disadvantaged communities. The third program is the New York Energy Rebate Fund, which will direct assistance to low and moderate income families and small businesses to reduce the ever increasing burden of energy costs, especially since as climate change gets worse, energy costs rise because we're having to use our ACs more in the summer and our heating more in the winters, because both extremes are getting more and more intense every year. So we need to make sure that we help the poorest people in our community be able to afford energy so they can heat their home, run their fridge, everything. And the fourth program is an impacted worker fund. Now, this is very important because one of the biggest arguments that people make against climate change legislation is that it will kill jobs. We're trying to shut down fossil fuel industry. What about all the gas workers, all the oil workers, the coal miners? This program addresses that. It will provide cash and job training to any impacted workers in the industries that are being shut down. It will have funds to replace lost tax revenue for the communities that rely on this fossil fuel infrastructure so that they don't have to cut their budgets, and for school districts themselves, as well as expanding economic development programs. So the main idea behind this bill is that these corporate polluters were the ones who got us into this situation. Honestly, it is my firm belief that these CEOs, these corporations have blood on their hands already, because climate change is not a threat. Climate change is here. It's a clear and present danger, and we hold murderers accountable. So the least that we're asking is that they pay for the damage that they've caused. And so this program will not only bring in those $7 billion back to our communities, but will also create and sustain 150,000 good green jobs, which will provide at least $60,000 salaries for people without college degrees and $70,000 for anybody with an associate's degree. It will also have prevailing wage standards, apprenticeship programs, and will have targets to will specifically target minority and women-owned business enterprises and provide funding for employee-owned businesses and utilities, which is incredible in my opinion. So right now, New York Renews and Citizen Action and 200 other organizations are already working to get this bill passed. We introduced it in the 2020 legislative session, and we have several co-sponsors for it already. But because of COVID, it kind of took up the priority. A lot of other things haven't been worked on because of COVID. So we are going to be introducing this in the 2021 legislative session, but our work starts now. We have already had coordinated lobby visits across the entire state, over 50 lobby visits back in early October. And we're planning on having even more lobby visits in the future. We are planning coordinated rallies in December across the state to push for climate legislation. And we're collecting stories of people who have been affected by climate change to really emphasize the issue. And so the way the CLCPA and the CCIA are connected is, like I said, one is trying to get us to renewable energy, and the other is trying to get us the funding to allow us to get there. So I'm not sure how much time we have to talk, so I want to make sure I'm not taking up too much time.
That is perfect. With that, why don't we turn this over to Liam to talk a little bit about another policy that offers another avenue that can supplement this to hold polluters accountable and make sure New York State has funding for the climate crisis. Liam, why don't you talk about your organization and go from there?
Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me here today. Yeah, so first I just like to introduce myself. My name is Liam. I'm a freshman at Middlebury College, and I co-founded and helped lead the New York Youth Climate Leaders, which is a policy-driven coalition of over 70 youth organizations advocating for environmental and economic justice in New York State. We coordinate actions across the state advocating for a comprehensive climate policy platform that includes divesting public assets from fossil fuels, taxing the ultra-wealthy to fund climate justice, halting all new fossil fuel infrastructure, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, just to name a few. We're also a coalition member of New York Renews. So we do a lot of protests, lobby meetings, and social media campaigns, and we'd love to have you, other young people, join us. Recently, we've been spending a significant chunk of our time working on ending fossil fuel subsidies in New York State. The bill that we're advocating for would require the governor to publicly disclose all fossil fuel related tax expenditures, and it installs a sunset date of 5 years from passage for these subsidies, except on a case-by-case basis for some essential subsidies that the legislature would have to approve. We believe that properly accounting for how much these subsidies cost our state and phasing out the non-essential expenditures is both critical to the financial health of our state and indispensable in the fight against climate change. There's just no reason to continue just handing out money to fossil fuel corporations when people are missing out on essential services every single day. New York State spends over $1.5 billion every year right now in fossil fuel related tax expenditures. So passing this bill would go a long way, not only to addressing climate change, but also to freeing up money for these essential programs that are being threatened by budget cuts. Especially when New York is facing a $14+ billion budget shortfall, and cutting essential programs like education, it just doesn't make any sense to give the multimillionaire fossil fuel executives even more money. So the bill we're advocating for, it passed the Senate in late July, and we're fighting to get it passed in the Assembly the next time that legislative session resumes. We think it's a really winnable campaign, so our goal is to pass it in the next few months. We've had some lobby meetings in support of the bill. We had a sign-on letter that garnered the signatures of 180 organizations from across New York State. And earlier this week, we hosted a press conference that got covered by outlets like Politico. We're also planning more events for the next few months that we'd love to have your help on, including lobby visits and protests, and I'm sure other things. So I'm just gonna share something in the chat right now. Here we go. So we have a petition in support of this legislation. I think we're at like 1,100 right now. If you guys could click on the link and sign it, it's one quick way to take action. And then if you want to take more action with the New York Youth Climate Leaders and join our coalition, visit our member registration page, and we'll make sure to link you up with the right people, and we're happy to work with you. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So many of you are familiar with NYPIRG. NYPIRG is the New York Public Interest Research Group. We've been around since 1973, and protecting the environment has always been one of our top priorities. It's why we're here today organizing events like this. So NYPIRG covers the environment in a broad array of areas. We are, of course, working with our partners here today to fight the climate crisis, which is the existential crisis of our times. We want to make sure that New York State is a global and national leader in fighting the climate crisis, in protecting water quality for all New Yorkers, making sure that public health is protected from toxic chemicals, and that we're also fighting to curb the tide of plastic pollution, which many of you may already be aware is intrinsically tied with the global climate crisis. And NYPIRG has a long history working on the Make Polluters Pay principle, and that principle is actually long-standing in New York State as well. So the reason why NYPIRG got involved in this, to provide some context, we've known that since the 1970s, the fossil fuel industry has known the environmental risks associated with burning fossil fuels. They accurately were able to predict the timetable that those changes would be occurring, but to avoid responsibility, the industry used its clout, its money, to withhold that evidence from the public. They used their influence to undermine climate science, and they used that money to hire consultants and lobbyists to derail health and environmental reforms. But thankfully, New York State has a strong history of holding polluters accountable, namely through the 1986 Environmental Bond Act, which actually helped create the New York State Superfund program. When the Attorney General was speaking earlier today, you probably heard her mention some of the lawsuits that have come out of New York State's Superfund program. NYPIRG had a role in helping advocate for the creation of this program on the state and federal level. That is our Make Polluters Pay program. So we have that principle already enshrined in law in New York State, and it's something that we need to continue to carry through to make sure that we hold polluters accountable now, particularly the oil and gas industry, for the destruction they've already caused, and also to make sure we have the money needed to have a just transition off of fossil fuels, and that our communities have the resources they need to protect themselves from the inevitable damages that will occur because we already are on a trajectory of global warming, of more frequent and more severe storms. And thankfully, there's also strong public support for the Make Polluters Pay principle. Liam mentioned his petition already has 1,000 signatures. That's like a good sign of that. But there's also been some amazing polling that's taken place nationally that shows that 70% of Americans support the concept of holding climate polluters financially responsible for efforts to fight climate change. So with that, I want to make sure, I've seen a lot of people posting their questions in the chat box. At this point, me, Liam, and Gabriel are going to have a conversation about what we can do to get these policies on the books, how we can keep organizing and building momentum, particularly in a digital era, and ultimately win and have New York State lead. So guys, I'm gonna like put the first topic out there. We are in this like weird digital time. We're still facing the COVID crisis. How has that impacted your advocacy, and what kind of work are you guys doing to keep the pressure up even as we're all largely still at home?
Liam, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So the current pandemic has definitely changed how activism looks. Like we haven't been able to have the giant in-person protests that we might like to have. But that said, I think it just demands a little more creativity, and we've definitely been able to make significant progress despite the pandemic. You know, we're shifting to virtual lobby meetings, virtual rallies and press conferences, or distributed rallies, socially distanced events. It's a little trickier, but I think it still can be done. And in some ways, it was a little easier back in April when we were all out of school and had very little work to do, because like all my friends just had no time, had so much time to spend on activism. And so yeah, it's been tricky, but it hasn't been as bad as I thought it was going to be in terms of organizing. I don't know what you guys think, but.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of that. We're still being able to continue our efforts virtually. Like in early October, we had those coordinated lobby visits, and like you said, they were all virtual. So we're still able to go through with that. And it definitely has thrown a wrench in some of our plans because we've had to adapt so much to COVID. But it kind of has been there, like he said, because a lot of people have ended up with a little more time on their hands. That has allowed for more people to get involved. It's like a bit of a lower threshold to get involved, especially when these actions just require people to get on their computer and join an event. So it has been good for bringing in people who might not have been willing to, on their first day volunteering, go out to a big rally, but you get them plugged in smaller ways. And at the same time, we have still been able to have some outdoor rallies. We just make a very big point of being as safe about it as we possibly can. Everybody wears masks. We try to distance from each other. And whenever possible, we try to also have a virtual component to our rallies for anybody who might be particularly worried about catching COVID, if they might have pre-existing conditions or some other complications, then they can still be a part of the action, but online. And so, you know, there's definitely still ways to move this forward, and we can't take our eyes off the ball for any reason. We have to keep pushing forward because, like other people have mentioned, we only have 10 years left to get this under control. This is an existential crisis for all of humanity.
I would absolutely have to second everything you guys have said. It's an interesting and mixed bag when it comes to digital organizing now. I think it is really exciting, though, to see so many new people still getting involved as they're at home. I think that people being at home has not changed. Well, rather, I think people are actually seeing, I almost feel like the COVID pandemic is like, brought people an even greater awareness of how important it is to have policies in place that protect public health before catastrophes occur. And I think that brings to mind people a natural connection with the climate crisis, especially since, you know, their homes being burned down. People are losing their homes out west as we're being told we need to stay home to stay safe. So I think this leads us to a natural point of the discussion. What do you guys think the principle, the make polluters pay principle, might connect to the COVID pandemic? And is this a way to mobilize more people during this time and afterwards?
I see a very natural connection, especially between, because of the budget implications of the COVID pandemic. The implications that the coronavirus has had on our economy have been, severe. And because of that, we're facing a $14.5 billion budget shortfall just in New York State. And so making polluters pay and stopping to giving free handouts to polluters is definitely makes a lot of sense in the context of COVID and in the context of these budget cuts. And yeah, so I think that's one way that we've been framing that, at least from the New York Youth Climate Leaders. And it's definitely been helpful in terms of engaging more people, because it's definitely made this fight in particular very timely.
I think those are great points. I mean, I personally see a really close connection with the Make Polluters Pay fight and the COVID pandemic, particularly because, we discussed this a little bit throughout the course of our chat today. The same polluters that have put us in this climate crisis have also made air quality really poor in a number of communities. And these are the same communities that are being more adversely struck by the COVID pandemic. And that's not a coincidence. Their health has been jeopardized because of climate polluters. And unfortunately, these are the same communities that have suffered from decades of environmental pollution. These are often the same communities that can be low income, minority majority. And I think at this point, it might be important to discuss, particularly with the CCIA. Gabrielle, I know you discovered this, you discussed this a bit, but how does that connect with a just transition? And how do we address workers who are already in the fossil fuel industry? I did see a number of comments in the chat box about labor and what it means to have a just transition.
Yeah, absolutely. So New York Renews is actually made up of, there's a lot of labor unions who are involved in the work that we do, who have key players in drafting the CLCPA and the CCIA. And we just, as progressives in general, the working class is our driving force. So we are very protective of them and making sure that the people, the workers, are not harmed. We are targeting their bosses, the CEOs, their corporations. So the CCIA has a number of protections for workers. So in communities where facilities are closing or laying off workers, we will provide funding for things such as employment guarantees to help build the infrastructure, renewable infrastructure that we need, retraining and placement in public or private sector positions, income support, pension support, early retirement options, transitional support, including skills training, job counseling, tuition support, and on-the-job training. And the ones I'm most excited about, support for impacted workers to start their own employee-owned businesses. So we have a number of protections for workers, and it's really important that we watch out for them, because a lot of times these workers are the same people living in these communities that are impacted by the health effects of this pollution. I have one of the other organizers at Citizen Action. They graduated from a high school in Schenectady of a class of about 100 people. And I think 3 of them had asthma or cancer not asthma, 3 of them had cancer. Think about that. 3 people out of 100 students having cancer at like 18, 19 years old. That is not natural. And that is because of pollution that has been targeted at their communities. And so we also need to make sure that as we're shutting down these polluting facilities, we are also replacing them with renewable facilities so that these communities don't lose tax revenue or employment opportunities, which is why there's a provision in the bill that a lot of the infrastructure that happens, the job opportunities, need to happen within these disadvantaged communities. And so this justice aspect of it is key. There is no solving climate change without us at the same time addressing the needs of these poor communities, working class, minority communities, which are often in the front lines of these disasters and this pollution.
That was great. Thank you. I want to take a moment just to remind folks that if you have questions for the panel, please plug them in the chat box. We have a few moments left because we're nearing an hour here. But Liam and Gabriel, why don't you, I know you included them in the chat box. This might be a good opportunity for us to chat again before we wrap up about how everyone that's a part of this call today can stay involved. And how does organizing here in New York connect to this larger movement nationally, right? Like I can say for the fossil fuel subsidy legislation in particular, that's nation-leading legislation. Liam, I know you discussed this a bit as well. We're one of the only states, in fact, I think we are the only state that has legislation like this that would end fossil fuel subsidies. And there's a larger movement happening nationally to get the federal government to stop giving out fossil fuel subsidies. So do you guys want to chip in anything about actions that students can take, that members of the public can take to get involved, and how the work we're doing here in New York can lead to bigger action?
Would you like to go first, Liam?
Sure. So I'll share what I shared in the chat again. The big thing that we're doing right now is for like November and December, we're going to focus a lot on this fossil fuel subsidies bill. The hope is that we can get it passed as soon as possible at the next time that session resumes. And then in January, we're going to be taking some other big actions that if you fill out our form, you can help plan. Basically, we are planning some distributed protests in December and January, and a virtual lobby day in December and January in support of fossil fuel subsidies, taxing the ultra wealthy to fund climate justice, and divesting the Common Retirement Fund. So we'd love to have your help, and just fill out the form, sign a petition, and we'll get to work.
Yeah, I'm so excited you brought this up, Liz. So real quick, first, I would just like to answer a comment in the chat about, in accordance with the vast data available on these issues, we have recognized the disparate impact that climate change and environmental injustice have had on poor and BIPOC communities. And these communities are more likely to acknowledge the reality of these, changes. Why is there not a disproportionate investment in engaging these communities as allies in leadership roles in NGOs and other organizational efforts? I wanted to bring that up because that's an extremely important question, and thank you for asking that. So our bill itself is very disproportionately targeted at BIPOC and poor communities in terms of the benefits and funding that we provide, the job training and all of that. But to your question about our ability to bring in these people to our movements, I can tell you that Citizen Action, for example, is completely volunteer led. We go to extreme lengths to make sure that our committees that work on particular issues, our state and regional boards who make the decisions at Citizen Action, are volunteer leaders who are directly impacted by these issues. So, for example, the president of our board at Citizen Action, Yvette Alfonso, she's a veteran of community organizing. She's a Black LGBT lady who has been involved with the Puerto Rican organization. I forgot what they were called. I think it was the Youngbloods. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. It was like the Puerto Rican version of the Black Panthers. And a lot of the rest of our board are also made up of people from these communities. So we absolutely do make a disproportionate effort to bring these people in, because we truly believe that the people who are closest to the issues are the ones who have the best ideas and the most incentive to move these things forward. So thank you for asking that, definitely. Young Lords, thank you so much. That's what it was, Young Lords. I'm so sorry I got that wrong. So real quick, I want to plug several things that we have coming up. This might be quite a few links coming up, but real quick, we have a big part of our victory in getting the COCPA passed. One of the first key things that happened was we were able to take the New York Senate away from the Republicans. So getting politicians in office who are like the Attorney General is crucial to getting our legislation passed. And so with this election coming up, Citizen Action has endorsed several incredible Working Family Party members who are huge allies in our climate change fight, such as Joe Seaman, Patrick Nelson, Michelle Hinchy, and Samara Brook. And if you want to see all of our candidates that we've endorsed, you can go to this link right here. And in order to get them elected, we are having several phone banks. So if you would like to join a phone bank, there are, give me 1 second so I can clean up these links. Here are links. We will have a phone bank for Joe Seaman next Thursday, October 22nd at 5:30 p.m. You can register at that link. On the 25th, we will have a phone bank for Patrick Nelson, and then another one for Michelle Hinchy. Now, for the actual climate work itself, I included a few links here. The first one is to share my story. So like I mentioned, a big part of our efforts is making these issues as visible as possible to really make it clear to people that this is an imminent, urgent problem that we need to put all of our efforts into fixing. And a key part of that is sharing stories from impacted people within these communities, especially communities of color, poorer communities who are impacted by climate change. The second one is if you would like to join New York Renew's list, where we send out more information about events coming up and other ways that you can get plugged in. And then the final link is a link to some toolkits that we have if you would like to lead your own lobby visits or help to plan out rallies, anything like that. We have in the works right now plans to do coordinated lobby visits and coordinated rallies in November and December, respectively. They are still in the planning phases, so if you would like to get involved with that, absolutely reach out to us, and we'll get you plugged in however we can. And also, last but definitely not least, Elizabeth, you made a great point. Liz, you made a great point about housing being so intricately connected to climate change. And like I mentioned, Citizen Action, we work on multiple issues. So I started recently back in August, and one of my primary goals has been to start a committee within Citizen Action of climate and housing volunteers because the two are so connected. So if you would like to join that committee, we had our first meeting on Monday. We're having our next meeting next Wednesday at 6 p.m. We're looking for anybody who wants to get deep, get your hands really messy into these issues. We're going to be going over a strategy chart, planning a long-term campaign, a timeline of actions we want to take, laying out who our targets are going to be. So we're going to plan the whole thing out, and we're going to stick to it, and we're going to see real victories because of this. And in terms of housing, right now, one of the other things that is going on is there's an eviction tsunami on the way. There's 1.5 million New Yorkers who might be kicked out of their homes by January 1st. So we are also trying to share stories about evictions because our leaders, Andrew Stewart Cousins, Carl Heastie, and Andrew Cuomo, are trying to sweep it under the rug. They're pretending it doesn't exist, and even saying that people getting evicted deserve to get evicted because they mismanaged their finances. We need to shame these leaders. So we need to make this as visible as possible, let people know that the moratoriums they put in place are false solutions that don't protect tenants nearly enough, and we need them to pass a real eviction moratorium. So we need stories from people. If you or anybody you know is having trouble paying rent, being harassed by your landlord, steep increases in rent, or being evicted, please reach out to me. We'll get you, we'll try to hook you up with some resources, some legal aid, and try to get a story from you so we can make your experiences visible. Because if you're not telling your story, then who is? The landlords. We can't let that happen. So please reach out to me. I'll also put my phone number in the chat. If anybody wants to text or call, we really, like I said, we're going up against billionaires here. So they got organized money. We need to get organized people. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for that. Just a note, NYPIRG, we work with a number of partners who do engage in electoral work. However, we are nonpartisan and do not engage in electoral work. But for those of you who are interested in getting involved, feel free to reach out to Gabrielle about that. So with that, I think it's time for us to start wrapping up. We would love for you to stay involved with our organizations. I'm going to put in the chat box here the link to go to nypirg.org. It's nypirg.org. And there you can sign up to be on our list to stay involved in our campaigns. I also am putting in the chat box a link to a petition that we are sharing. A number of the folks on this call that we work with, and a number of our students have been doing a lot of work to stop the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in New York State. Obviously, if we're going to move off of fossil fuels, we cannot continue to build out polluting fossil fuel infrastructure. We cannot continue pipelines. We cannot transition power plants to become gas peaker plants. And that's why I put in the link a Google Doc form so you can fill out our petition to stop the Astoria gas peaker plant out in Queens. So with that, I think we'll be wrapping up here. Thank you all so much for attending today. To those of you who have been watching through our live stream, thank you for attending. I believe we had some folks attending from the press today and from various elected offices. Would like to especially thank you guys for joining. Please continue to cover the climate crisis and the work of advocates in your coverage for elected officials on this call. Please work with us to pass these important pieces of legislation. We know that there's a lot of work cut out for you guys. And yeah, thank you all so much. While folks are leaving, I will put on some music as folks tune out.